Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the last lecture of this module. The module, as you know by now, is English 456, Prose 1, and in this module we've been discussing essays written by some of the greatest essayists in English literature. And the essay that I have chosen for today to wind up this module is a particularly interesting one. So let us go through the essay, read the text, deal with the explanation, and then before I wind up and before I say Allah Hafiz to you, we're going to go quickly over whatever we have done in these lectures regarding essay writing and the great essays of English literature. As you can see, this lecture is based on the essay titled A Chapter on Ears, and just as the title is interesting, so is the essay interesting. So let us see what Lamb has to tell us regarding ears. Now he starts off with a very captivating statement. He says, I have no ear. Now that is not to say that he has no ears, but he's going to explain in a while what exactly he means by this statement. He says, mistake me not, for it is not the exterior twin appendages, something that is sort of hanging by the body, which gives us, as he says, a handsome look or a beautiful look, and which gives us the feeling that we are complete human beings. It's not the physical ear that he is talking about. I am, I think, rather delicately than copiously provided with those conduits. So he says, as far as the physical ears are concerned, I have them. Physically, my ears are present, and I feel no disposition to envy the mule for his plenty. The mule, you know, has rather long hanging ears. So he says, I don't envy the mule. I don't want to have ears that are very long, because they will not be any more useful for me than the 2 ears that I have been blessed with. So he says, I do not envy the mule or the mole. The mole, you know, has tiny ears. So he says that the ears that have been given to me as a human being are just the right size for my body and for my use. So he says that I do not envy any of the animals that have either larger ears than I do or smaller ears. My ears fit my body, and they are just right for the use that I put them to. Neither have I incurred or done anything to incur with Defoe that hideous disfigurement which constrained him to draw upon assurance to feel quite unabashed and at ease upon that article. Now throughout history there have been people who have had either large ears or small ears, or ears which have been slightly disfigured. So Lamb says that I do not have anything to complain about as far as the physical appendages are concerned. As far as these my physical ears are concerned, I have nothing to complain of. They're not too big for me, they're not too small for me, they are not disfigured, so they are just the right size for my body. And I have never wanted to have ears that were different from the ones that I do have, unlike some people, of which he counts Daniel Defoe. I was never, I thank my stars, in the pillory, nor, if I read them aright, is it within the compass of my destiny that I ever should be. When therefore I say that I have no ear, you will understand me to mean for music. Okay, so it is for music that he is definitely talking about ears. It's a saying that so-and-so has no ear, and it is understood, generally speaking, that it is an ear for music. And when you go into the deeper meaning of the term, you realize that what he's trying to say is that he cannot appreciate music. Music is something that you have to feel. It's something that you have to experience. And if you cannot experience the creativity or the beauty of music, then no amount of drumming music into your head is going to make you understand or appreciate it. So when Lamb refers to the fact that he has no ear, what he's talking about is specifically ear for music. To say that this heart never melted at the concourse of sweet sounds would be a foul self-libel. Water parted from the sea never fails to move it strangely, so does in infancy. But they were used to be sung at her harpsichord by a gentlewoman, the gentlest sure that ever merited the appellation, the sweetest. Why should I hesitate to name Mrs. S, once the blooming Fanny Weatherall of the Temple, who had power to thrill the soul of Elia, small imp as he was, even in his long coats, and to make him glow, tremble, and blush with a passion that not faintly indicated the dayspring of that absorbing sentiment which was afterwards destined to overwhelm and subdue his nature. For Alice W. Okay, let's go back. So he says, when I say that I have no ear, what I mean is I have no appreciation for music, which is not to say that I have never been able to appreciate music, because from the time that I was very small, and Lamb, you know, in this essay, as in the others, is talking through Elia. So he talks about Elia in the third person instead of in the first person, as he generally does. So he takes on the guise this time of Charles Lamb and speaks about Elia as the third person. And so he says that from the time that Elia was very small, he has been listening to music, and he enjoyed music that was played by Mrs. S. So this particular gentlewoman who played the harpsichord had the ability to thrill the little Elia, who Lamb says was in long coats at that time. That is a reference to how small he was. So he says that he enjoyed music as a small boy. It is only music that is played in contemporary times, and remember, contemporary for Lamb is 18th century. It's only music that is played in contemporary times that Lamb finds difficult to understand, and that is why he says, I have no ear for music. I even think that sentimentally I am disposed to harmony, but organically I am incapable of a tune. I have been practicing God Save the King all my life, whistling and humming of it over to myself in solitary corners, and I am not yet arrived, they tell me, within many quavers of it. Yet hath the loyalty of Elia never been impeached. So Lamb fluctuates between speaking of Elia in the first person and in the third person. So he says, it's not that I cannot or have never been able to appreciate music. I do appreciate music, and I am able to enjoy music. but what I cannot do is produce music. Now, when he says, I have no ear, it is not from the point of view of listening to music that he is referring to having no ear for music, but of being able to reproduce it. Music, singing, songs are heard and then reproduced. Lamb says, I have been practicing God Save the King or the national anthem all my life, and I have not been able to master it yet. And mind you, he says, I've been practicing in solitary corners. I don't want people to hear because I cannot sing properly. So I try to sing it, and yet I fail miserably. In spite of the fact that he cannot sing anything, not even the national anthem, he says that I am very loyal, I am very patriotic, and no one can say that I am not patriotic in spite of the fact that I cannot sing God Save the King. I am not without suspicion that I have an undeveloped faculty of music within me. For thrumming in my wild way on my friend A's piano the other morning, while he was engaged in an adjoining parlour on his return, he was pleased to say he thought it could not be the maid. On his first surprise at hearing the keys touched in somewhat an airy and masterful way, not dreaming of me, his suspicions had lighted on Jenny. Now, Lamb, with a slight tongue-in-cheek humor, relates to us this story of an occasion when he went to his friend's house in the morning, and while his friend was in another room, he found the piano and he started playing on it. But Lamb, being what he is, could not play well, and in a rather ironic manner he describes that when his friend came back to the room, he said, you know, I thought it must be the maid. And then he says it could not have been the maid. So what his friend was trying to say was, even the maid doesn't play it so badly. But what Lamb takes it to mean is that the maid plays worse than Lamb. So Jenny, the maid, is the one who is being discussed here, and Lamb says that, you know, my friend was so surprised that I could play the piano, and he wondered who it was who was playing, and he thought that it could not be the maid Jenny. But a grace snatched from a superior refinement soon convinced him that some being, technically perhaps deficient, but higher in form from a principle common to all the fine arts, had swayed the keys to a mood which Jenny, with all her enthusiasm, could never have elicited from them. I mention this as a proof of my friend's penetration, and not with any view of disparaging Jenny. So when his friend says, I thought it could not have been Jenny, the friend is trying to tell Lamb that even Jenny doesn't play that badly. But the meaning that Lamb infers is that he is playing better than Jenny can. And so he says that my friend knew that it had to be a higher being. It could not be a servant who would play in such a manner. So Lamb takes it as a compliment, whereas his friend has not intended this statement as a compliment. So he says it's not to disparage Jenny, but it's to show how keen the observation of my friend is when he says that I mention this as a proof of my friend's penetration, my friend's ability to distinguish talent from the poor ting-ting of Jenny the maid. Scientifically, I could never be made to understand what a note in music is, or how one note should differ from another. Much less in voices can I distinguish a soprano from a tenor. Only sometimes the thorough bass I contrive to guess at from its being supereminently harsh and disagreeable. So all those students who always want the bass to be turned higher, you need to keep this in mind. Lamb does not like bass. Not that he can distinguish between soprano and tenor. He says, I do not know what a soprano's voice is like, or what is the quality of sound or the music that is produced from within. How is it to be qualified? He says, I cannot read music, I cannot distinguish between one note and another when it is being played. Yes, I love music, I love the harmony that is produced, and I enjoy it. But if you ask me to reproduce it or to sing a song, I cannot sing a song even to save my life. So I tremble for my misapplication of the simplest terms of that which I disclaim. While I profess my ignorance, I scarce know what to say I am ignorant of. I hate perhaps by misnomers. Sostenuto and adagio stand in the like relation of obscurity to me, and sol, fa, mi, re is as conjuring as baralipton. So as far as rhythm is concerned, harmony is concerned, or distinguishing between different notes is concerned, it's all Greek to Lamb. In fact, Greek he can understand, but what he cannot understand is how to separate or define or distinguish between one note and another, between one kind of music or song and another. It is hard to stand alone in an age like this, constituted to the quick and critical perception of all harmonious combinations, I verily believe, beyond all preceding ages, since Jubal stumbled upon the gamut, to remain, as it were, singly unimpressible to the magic influences of an art which is said to have such an especial stroke at soothing, elevating, and refining the passions. So, music, which Lamb describes in flowing terms, in very high-sounding terms, he says, is beyond me. I cannot distinguish between different kinds of music. I cannot distinguish between two notes in music. I cannot sing two lines of a song. I can't even sing my national anthem. I cannot sing God Save the King. And that is something that I have been practicing since the time that I could speak. I've been practicing in corner, and yet I am unable to deliver it. So he says that it is rather depressing, it's rather frustrating not to be able to do this in an age and time when people spend hours appreciating music, listening to different forms of music, and making a commentary on the beauty, the sweetness, and the power of different voices. Yet rather than break the candid current of my confessions, I must avow to you that I have received a great deal more pain than pleasure from this so cried up faculty. Now, you would wonder how that is possible. How is it that a man who is exposed to music says that music, instead of bringing pleasure to me, is responsible for a lot of pain being inflicted on me? And Lamb is going to tell you in a bit how music becomes painful. But the fact is that this thing bothers him, something which the whole world appreciates, which the whole world enjoys. If Lamb cannot enjoy and appreciate it, then there must be something wrong with Lamb, not with the music, not with the singer or the song, but with the listener. And that is what frustrates Lamb, because he says that it pains me to realize that there's something that the whole world appreciates and which I cannot. So I am constitutionally susceptible of noises. A carpenter's hammer in a warm summer noon will fret me into more than midsummer madness. But those unconnected, unset sounds are nothing to the measured malice of music. Look at the beauty of the words, the measured malice of music. That is the beauty of Lamb's language. He uses vocabulary, he uses words and phrases which are so beautiful and which convey meaning so appropriately. So to come back to the text, he says that I have very sensitive ears, in the sense that if I hear a noise, if I hear sound in the middle of the day when there's a lot of hustle and bustle and there's a lot of noise anyway, if I hear the carpenter's hammer, I can distinguish it from the other background noises, what is referred to these days as white noise. I can distinguish between the sound that is made by the carpenter's hammer and the sound of traffic, etc., that forms a kind of background for all my activities during the day. And so he says that that particular sound has the ability to make me go mad, because my ear is very sensitive and it perceives this jarring sound even apart from the other noises of the day. But even that sound, even that jarring sound that the carpenter's hammer makes, is not as painful to me personally as is some of this so-called music that is produced. Now, those of you who like music might not agree with this statement, but if you have heard your elders speak about the kind of music that is being played these days, hard rock, pop music, rap, reggae, heavy metal, you might find your parents, your elders saying, "You can't call this music, this is a lot of noise." And you say, "No, but this is music, I appreciate it, I like it." So as far as music is concerned, like the other creative arts, one man's meat is another man's poison. What you like, I may not like. What I love and what I would give my life for, you may not be able to tolerate. So Lamb says that nothing is as painful to me as some of the music that is played these days. He calls it the measured malice of music. The ear is passive to those single strokes, willingly enduring stripes, while it hath no task to con. To music, it cannot be passive. So the ear can be immune to the sound of the carpenter's hammer on a summer day, but it cannot ignore music. You can shut out the sound of a hammer because that's an individual sound. But when you talk about music, there are so many different sounds that combine to produce harmony that you cannot ignore it no matter how hard you try. So he says, spite of its inaptitude to thread the maze like an unskilled eye painfully poring upon hieroglyphics, I have sat through an Italian opera till for sheer pain and inexplicable anguish I have rushed out into the noisiest places of the crowded streets to solace myself with sounds which I was not obliged to follow and get rid of the distracting torment of endless, fruitless, barren attention. Very strong words, very strong criticism of music. But Lamb, you see, is not afraid of anything or anyone. So he says that there have been times when I have been made to listen to music, and he's talking about Italian opera in particular, and he says it is so frustrating that there are times when in the middle of the Italian opera I have rushed outside, gone into the streets with all their noise of passing traffic and people calling out to each other and vendors selling their wares, and I have found it bliss compared to the music that is produced and used and made during an Italian opera. So Lamb clearly is not in favor of Italian opera. Remember what I said a while back about one man's meat being another man's poison? There are people who are so fond of Italian opera that they would give their souls to be able to listen to some of the great masters producing music and singing in an Italian opera. Lamb clearly does not like Italian opera, and he says that I have been unable to sit through an Italian opera. I prefer the sound of the street with all those discordant noises to what is produced in the Italian opera, because I'm not forced to attend, I'm not forced to listen to those sounds. When I go outside in the street, I can block out certain sounds. I can train my ears to listen to only specific sounds. I cannot do that when I'm sitting listening to an Italian opera, because the music is so overwhelming that it cannot be ignored. I take refuge in the unpretending assemblage of honest, common life sounds, and the purgatory of the enraged musician becomes my paradise. So he says, I can bear sounds of traffic, I can bear hawkers and vendors selling their wares, calling out to each other, cursing and abusing each other. I have absolutely no problem in the street with the street sounds, because what I want to, I listen to, and what I do not want to, I block out. But I cannot do that when I'm sitting listening to an opera. The simple reason is there's such a volume of sound that it overpowers you, it overwhelms you, and you cannot ignore it. You can't sit there and say, all right, I'm going to block out all sound. It just cannot be done. He says, I have sat at an oratorio, that profanation of the purposes of the cheerful playhouse. Lamb uses big words here. Watching the faces of the auditory in the pit. What a contrast to Hogarth's laughing audience, immovable or affecting some faint emotion, till I have imagined myself in some cold theatre in Hades, where some of the forms of the earthly one should be kept up with none of the enjoyment, or like that party in a parlor, all silent and all damned. Okay, so he says, I have listened to plays. And moving on from the Italian opera, he comes to the plays and he says, I have seen some of the dramas, and believe me, sitting through those dramas, you feel as if you are in hell. It's so painful listening to the sounds of the actors, listening to the background music, and then in the intervals, more music. He says it's overwhelming and unbearable, totally and absolutely unbearable. Because when I listen to such a volume of sound and music, I feel as if I'm sitting in a cold theater in Hades, in hell. I'm sitting in the underworld where everything is without life. That is the feeling that I get when I sit through these plays and when I am forced to sit through these plays. Above all, those insufferable concertos and pieces of music, as they are called, do plague and embitter my apprehension. Words are something, but to be exposed to an endless battery of mere sounds, to be long a-dying, to lie stretched upon a rack of roses, to keep up languor by unintermitted effort, to pile honey upon sugar and sugar upon honey to an interminable tedious sweetness, to fill up sound with feeling and strain ideas to keep pace with it, to gaze on empty frames and be forced to make the pictures for yourself, to read a book, all stops, and be obliged to supply the verbal matter, to invent extemporary tragedies to answer to the vague gestures of an inexplicable rambling mind. These are faint shadows of what I have undergone from a series of the ablest executed pieces of this empty instrumental music. So what he cannot comprehend, what he cannot understand is music. He says words, songs, I can comprehend them. But when it's music and music coming upon music, and he makes this comparison of honey piled upon sugar and sugar piled upon honey. How much of sweetness can you take? Those of you who have a sweet tooth will have an idea of what it is like when something becomes too sweet even for you. So Lamb says, if there are songs, if there are words, I can understand them, I can appreciate them. But when it is only music, what is termed instrumental music, then it becomes too much to bear. And that is when I feel totally frustrated. It's like a book that has only full stops in it, only periods given it, only dots, and you have to supply the text. It's like a mime that is being acted on the stage and you have to provide the dialogue. So sheer instrumental music is something that Lamb finds unable to appreciate or admire. I deny not that in the opening of a concert I have experienced something vastly lulling and agreeable. So in the opening of a concert, he says, you know, when speeches are being made or when the background is being given, I can go off to sleep. It's so sweet, the sounds that are coming in. Like that disappointing book in Patmos, or like the comings on of melancholy described by Burton, doth music make her first insinuating approaches. So he brings in different references, and he says that you know, when I listen to the opening of a concert, I can very frequently go off to sleep because you have some very soft and soothing music that is being played, and that is enough to put me to sleep. But what I cannot understand is this this music coming interminably, music with no stop, with no pauses whatsoever. Most pleasant it is, he says, to such as are melancholy given to walk alone in some solitary grove betwixt wood and water, by some brookside, and to meditate upon some delightsome and pleasant subject, which shall affect him most, and a most incomparable delight to build castles in the air, to go smiling to themselves, acting an infinite variety of parts, which they suppose and strongly imagine they act, or that they see done. So he says, when you're alone, you can talk to yourself, you can smile to yourself, you can go around making speeches, and nobody will interrupt you, nobody will disturb you, because it's one of the pleasantest things to do, to go for a walk and to be alone with your thoughts and ideas. That is the time when you can best converse with yourself, when you can best think your thoughts out loud. So delightsome those toys at first, they could spend whole days and nights without sleep, even whole years in such contemplations and fantastical meditations, which are like so many dreams and will hardly be drawn from them, winding and unwinding themselves as so many clocks, and still pleasing their humours, until at last the scene turns upon a sudden, and they, being now habituated to such meditations and solitary places, can endure no company, can think of nothing but harsh and distasteful subjects. So when you're taking such a walk, you're alone with your thoughts, with your ideas. You may smile to yourself, you may talk to yourself, you may act out your ideas. And it's a wonderful feeling to be alone with oneself, to have space and occasion to give voice to your ideas without anyone objecting. But what comes as a rude awakening at such a moment is when things take a sudden turn. Now what Lamb is referring to is the fact that when a concert starts, he is lulled to sleep, and in that state between sleeping and waking, he dreams that he's alone with his thoughts, that he's taking a solitary walk by the side of a stream, and he's walking through a wood, and with all nature around him. It is a beautiful image. And Lamb says that it's something that's really enjoyable for him until things take a sudden turn, until something happens, some new item is introduced in the concert, and that acts as a kind of jolt of electricity, and Lamb is wakened very harshly. Fear, sorrow, suspicion, discontent, cares and weariness of life surprise them on a sudden, and they can think on nothing else, continually suspecting. No sooner are their eyes open, but this infernal plague of melancholy seizeth on them, and terrifies their souls, representing some dismal object to their minds, which now by no means, no labor, no persuasions, they can avoid. They cannot be rid of it. They cannot resist. So this music that comes to them from all sides, it's like something that is supposedly heavenly, supposedly it is food for the soul, but from Lamb's point of view, it has just the opposite effect. It serves to frustrate him, to bring out his worst emotions, because he thinks that there is too much of this music, that it's like a flood that drowns Lamb the listener, and no longer can he imagine that he's alone with his ideas and that he can give expression to his innermost thoughts and ideas. Something like this scene turning I have experienced at the evening parties at the house of my good Catholic friend, who by the aid of a capital organ, himself the most finished of players, converts his drawing room into a chapel, his weekdays into Sundays, and these latter into minor heavens. And now Lamb turns the angle of the essay, and he picks up on this one phrase that he has used, that is scene turning, and he brings it to something specific. So far he's been speaking of generalities and giving slightly vague ideas. Now he comes to something more specific, and an incident that he can narrate with confidence, because this is something that happened to him personally. So he says that one of my friends, and Lamb does not give the complete name of the friends, he will either use the initials or he will use the first 2 or 3 letters of the friend's name, and he leaves it to the reader to fill in whatever blanks he gives. So here also he does not give the complete name of the friend. He just says, one of my friend, he has this habit of turning evening parties into sermons by all of a sudden starting to play upon the piano, and the music that he plays gives the impression that it is church music. And of course here Lamb is referring to the fact that the piano, traditionally speaking, has been an instrument that is played in the church. So he says that my friend has this rather nasty and uncomfortable habit of turning a party into a church service by starting to play upon the piano. And he says, when my friend commences upon one of these solemn anthems, which peradventure struck upon my heedless ear, rambling in the side aisle of the dim abbey some 35 years since, waking a new sense and putting a soul of old religion into my young apprehension, whether it be that in which the psalmist, weary of the persecutions of bad men, wisheth to himself dove's wings, or that other which with a like measure of sobriety and pathos inquireth by what means the young man shall best cleanse his mind, a holy calm pervadeth me. I am for the time wrapped above earth and possess joys not promised at my birth. So let's go back. And he says, when my friend starts to do this, I shut my ears and I refuse to listen to whatever he's playing or whatever he's singing, because I do not like to have a party turned into a church service. I do not like to have the spirit of the party robbed. And when my friend starts to play the piano and he starts to sing along with the piano, Lamb says that it is more than I can bear, and that is when I mentally shut all perception of the music, and I think to myself that I am in a world where I am the only one, and I'm taking a solitary walk by the side of a stream and talking to myself, acting out certain ideas. So Lamb has that ability to shut out the outside world if and when he wants to. But when this master of the spell, not content to have laid a soul prostrate, goes on in his power to inflict more bliss than lies in her capacity to receive, still pouring in for protracted hours, fresh waves, and fresh from the sea of sound, or from that inexhausted German ocean, above which in triumphant progress, dolphin-seated, ride those Arions, Haydn and Mozart, with their attendant Tritons, Bach, Beethoven, and a countless tribe, whom to attempt to reckon up but would plunge me again in the deeps. I stagger under the weight of harmony, reeling to and fro at my wit's end. Clouds as of frankincense oppress me. Priests, altars, censers dazzle before me. The genius of his religion hath me in her toils. A shadowy triple tiara invests the brow of my friend, late so naked, so ingenuous. He is Pope, and by him sits, like as the anomaly of dreams, a she-pope too, tri-coroneted like himself. I am converted and yet a Protestant. I know this is the longest text, but let me go through it quickly, and then I'll explain what Lamb is trying to say here. And myself grand heresiarch, okay? This is quite a tongue twister. Or three heresies centered in my person. I am Marcion, Abion, and Cerinthus, Gog and Magog, what not, till the coming in of the friendly supper tray dissipates the figment, and a draught of true Lutheran beer at once reconciles me to the rationalities of a purer faith, and restores to me the genuine, unterrifying aspects of my pleasant countenanced host and hostess. I have been there and still would go. 'Tis like a little heaven below. Okay, let's go back and see what he's trying to say here. Now, the occasion that he refers to is of an evening where his friend has thrown a party, and you see how the entire atmosphere of the party is changed when the host sits down at the piano and starts to play music. And this sort of acts like a catalyst for Lamb and transports him to another world where he thinks he is alone, and where he can act out his innermost thoughts and ideas and pretend that there is no one with him. But Lamb says this can only go on as long as his host does not introduce the music of the great German composers. And Lamb gives you the names. He talks of Bach, he talks of Beethoven and Mozart, and he says that their music has the power to overwhelm me and drown me in this sea of honey and sugar, until the only way I can find relief, and here Lamb has a touch of irony when he says the supper tray is brought in, that is when I feel that I can have a little relief from this flood of music in which I feel that I am drowning. So what he's trying to say is that he can bear music, he can appreciate music, but there is a kind of music that he finds he is helpless against, and that is the music that has been composed by the great Germans. That's enough for this essay. I would like to spend the remainder of the time to go through whatever we have done in this module. This lecture, as you know, is the last in the series of ENG 456. So let me go through the different stages that we have covered to reach this point, that is the essay of a chapter on ears written by Charles Lamb. I have been trying to recap whatever we've been studying, but I'd like to present a kind of summary here of the different essayistic styles and the themes of different essays that we have discussed in this module. And I hope that you have enjoyed listening to and studying these essays as much as I have enjoyed teaching them. When we started off in the initial lectures, I told you that this module would deal with essays written by different essayists. By this time, you are familiar to a great extent with not only the history of English literature and language, but the history of England itself. Because when we do English literature, we have to have a thorough grounding in the history of England, or because the political scenario, the economic scenario is very important in order to understand any genre in English literature. When we started this module, we started with the essays of Francis Bacon, and I know that you have had many writers, poets and dramatists who had produced the maximum amount of their work during the Renaissance. Francis Bacon is the epitome of the Renaissance in the sense that he delved into many different fields, and since he was a courtier, jurist, and he had studied science, he had studied the arts, he was a philosopher, he delved into many different fields of knowledge, and all this is reflected ultimately in his essay. He has a very pithy, concise and clear style. He uses the bare minimum of words, and using the bare minimum of words, he still manages to convey the depth and the intensity of meaning. From Bacon, writing in the 16th and the 17th centuries, we moved on to essays written by Joseph Addison and Richard Steele in The Spectator, and these were essays which dealt with whatever was of interest to the aristocracy or to the noblemen, because Addison and Steele basically belonged to what is known as the well-heeled class, the established class, the class that doesn't have to worry about things like jobs and atta and dal and a roof over their heads. They have plenty of money that they have inherited, and so they spend their life in parties and going from one place to another and taking a lot of trouble over how they dress and spending a lot of time, money and effort on their dress. And so you saw that the essays from The Spectator focused on issues that were related to the aristocracy and which were not so much what you would consider issues of the common man. But when you come to Charles Lamb, you see again that he's also writing in the 18th century, and I want you to remember that the 16th, 17th and 18th centuries comprise the golden period for essays, and you had the maximum number of essayists writing at this time. Due to the constraints of this module, I have not been able to explore all the essays, but I would definitely recommend that you read on your own essays written by Robert Louis Stevenson, essays written by John Ruskin, by even Ralph Waldo Emerson, because whatever we've been able to do in this module does not even come close to an introduction to essay writing. But the aim of this entire program is to give you a taste of literature, and then to leave you to go ahead and to read more. So when I chose these essays written by Charles Lamb, and which were published in under the title of Essays of Ilya and the Last Essays of Ilya, my aim was to introduce you to certain topics, certain essays, so that you would want to read more. And you see that when you come to somebody like Charles Lamb, he has a different style from that of either Addison and Steele or of Francis Bacon. He has a very different and a unique style. He has a lot of asides. It's almost like he's producing a drama. It's almost like he's telling a story, and while telling a story, he goes off on a tangent and he discusses other things. So one thing that you see in Charles Lamb's essayistic style is that he uses a lot of punctuation. He uses these long dashes that you have seen, and which you've just seen in this, the friend whose name he mentions, and he just writes NOV and then he puts a dash. So those are sort of a fill in the blanks, and then he uses dashes which show you the different tracks that his thoughts are taking. He goes off on one track and then he comes back, and then he goes off on another track and he comes back again, and then he goes on to a third direction. So Lamb has a lot of that. He's sort of a rambling style. It's not as pithy and concise as the style of Francis Bacon, but it is it's related more to issues and the concerns of an ordinary person. It's more like you and I. For example, this current chapter on ears, the kind of discussion that he has brought about regarding music, it's something that we can relate with, because I may like classical music, you may like rap, another person may like heavy metal, or may like pop or disco music. So all of us have different tastes, and what Lamb is trying to say here is that he finds things like the Italian opera or instrumental music very heavy. It's very difficult for him to digest this music and to appreciate it, and that perhaps is one reason why he cannot reproduce music, why he cannot sing a simple song, not even his national anthem. So Lamb's style is different. Now the purpose in discussing these different essayists and their essayistic style is not, repeat, not to show that one is better than the other. The aim in introducing essays written by Francis Bacon, Joseph Addison, Richard Steele and Charles Lamb is to show you different styles of writing. They all come under the heading of essay, but not only are they written at different points in time, but you also see how the political and historical and economic and social and cultural background influences their essay topics and the style of writing. Bacon writes about areas which are abstract. He writes about truth. He writes about simulation and dissimulation. But when you come to essays written in The Spectator, you find out that they deal with the concerns of the aristocracy. They deal with clothes. Addison and Steele write about who goes where, who does what, and they are dealing with people with whom they were familiar. And then when it comes to Charles Lamb, you find out that he is writing about things that are of interest to the middle class, educated people. And he starts off with The Dream Children, where he's writing about two imaginary children, and then he wakes up and he finds that it was all a dream because Lamb never had children. He never got married. And then he goes and he writes about things like the borrowers and the lenders. He talks about Coleridge, and he says that, you know, Coleridge is one person to whom if you were to lend a book, he would return it with interest because he would write comments on the sides, and that made the book even more valuable. He talks about popular fallacies, and he tries to explain to us how certain expressions become very popular and are used very frequently and are believed, and yet if you study them in the perspective of real life, you find out that they're not quite true. And then he discusses things like a chapter on ears. He talks about different characters. So the aim of introducing you to these great essays is not to show that so and so is the best and so is the worst. It is to give you a taste of different styles. And I hope, again, I repeat myself, I hope that you have enjoyed this as much as I have enjoyed teaching it to them. So this is where we part ways, and I wish you success in your future life, and I hope you do wonderful assignments and wonderful exams. So from Shahina Ayub Bhatti, this is Allah Hafiz, and best of luck to all of you.